We've learned about God's creative abilities and how awesome he is and how good of a creation. We've learned about both human and angel freedom of choice and what that means. God is creating boundaries for the humans, and they blow right past them and get those consequences that God outlined right from the beginning. We learn about God wanting relationship as he walks through and helps the hurt humans through time and time again. We learn that the humans are continuously making bad choices, all the way down to every single human is making bad choices, and evil thoughts. And God has a remnant. It finally just gets down to one man, and he finally just says, all right, I need to protect this one man and his family, and floods the rest of the earth, gets rid of the evil to protect that one man, and then promises not to do that again. And then we go into Abraham. We skipped over a few stories, but Abraham is the next major character, and we see that God wants a man who is able to be selfless and be generous with his resources and his future. Being a very loving man, very generous man. And we learn about him, we learn about God not caring so much about humans being perfect, but more about humans believing in him and being in relationship with him. Because Abraham wasn't a perfect guy, but God continued to use him and counted his belief as faith. As righteousness. His belief was righteousness, not his actual righteousness, because that was impossible. And then we learned about Moses. And Moses was called as, again, not a perfect guy, but one that was a shepherd in the wilderness and had been thrown down from a prince of Egypt all the way down to being a lowly shepherd. And so God says, hey, this is the perfect guy for me to rescue, again, my people, my remnant, in Egypt, right? This guy that knows the Egyptian culture, but is also part of the Israelite nation as well. So I'm going to use him. And he calls him, and that story of how God uses him is what we're going to continue on today. The Passover and the plagues. So again, get your listening ears on. We're going to recap the story. I'm going to ask you for every single plague in order. All right. Moses and his brother Aaron approached the Pharaoh, saying, let the Israelites leave Egypt for just 3 days to worship God. If you do not, God will punish the Egyptians severely. But Pharaoh was stubborn. He said, who is this God that I should listen to him? Get back to work. After their meeting, Pharaoh punished them all with harder work, all the Israelite slaves. So God sent a series of plagues on the Egyptians and their land, but these plagues had no effect on the Israelites. The first plague turned the Nile River into blood for 7 days. Blood was everywhere, but Pharaoh's magicians could do the same with their incantations. It didn't take long, and the fish died, the water smelled, and the people were thirsty. The second plague was a mob of frogs that covered the entire country, but the magicians could do the same with their incantations. When all the frogs died, the Egyptians shoveled them into stinking, rotting piles. The third and fourth plagues brought lice upon all the people and animals. Pharaoh's magicians couldn't do the same and said to Pharaoh, God must be doing this to us. When all the lice and flies died, the Egyptians shoveled them into stinking piles again. After each of these plagues, Moses returned to Pharaoh and asked him to let the Israelites go so they could worship God, but Pharaoh refused. The fifth plague brought severe disease to Egypt's livestock. Without touching Israel's livestock at all, the Egyptians' livestock died. The sixth plague caused the Egyptians to break out with horrible sores all over their bodies. Pharaoh's magicians couldn't even try to copy this miracle because they were covered in boils just like everybody else. Pharaoh said to Moses, enough! If you stop these plagues, I will let you leave. But after God stopped the plagues, Pharaoh was more stubborn and he changed his mind. The seventh and eighth plagues brought hail and locusts that destroyed trees and plants. Any livestock in the field that were left were killed by the hail. The crops were destroyed by the hail and then devoured by the locusts. There was not one blade of grass left uneaten by the locusts. Every green thing in Egypt was eaten by them. The ninth plague brought complete darkness over the land of the Egyptians for 3 days. But the land of the Israelites had sunlight. Despite all this, Pharaoh still would not let the Israelites leave. God told Moses, Pharaoh's stubbornness will give me the opportunity for greater miracles in Egypt. So God sent one final plague. Moses warned Pharaoh. God says, about midnight I will pass through Egypt. Every firstborn son will die, rich or poor, from Pharaoh's son on down. All the Egyptians will weep loudly, but the Israelites will not be touched. Then you will beg Israel to leave. Then Moses gave the Israelites instructions from God on how they could be saved from this plague. He told the people, each household is to select a pure male lamb a year old. Take the blood from this sacrifice and put it on the doorframes of your home. This will be a sign. God will pass over the households with blood and spare your firstborn. You shall tell this story from generation to generation, how God accepted the sacrifice of a lamb in the place of your firstborn. This is the Lord's Passover. So the people of Israel did exactly what God told them to do. At midnight, God came through Egypt and took the life of every firstborn son. He passed over the households that had blood on their doorframes. The entire country was awakened during the night because someone died in nearly every Egyptian home, including Pharaoh's own son. The Egyptians begged the Israelites to leave right away and gave them their wealth to leave quickly. That night, over 2 million Israelites set out to return to their promised land. God guided them through with a pillar of cloud during the day and a pillar of fire at night. Again, Pharaoh changed his mind. He sent his armies after the Israelites. When the people of Israel arrived at the bank of the Sea of Reeds, they saw Pharaoh and his armies approaching behind them, and they began to panic. But Moses told the people, "Don't be afraid, God will rescue you today." God blinded the army by placing a great cloud between them and the Israelites. Then God told Moses to stretch out his hand over the sea. As he did this, a wind opened a dry path for them to walk across. The next morning, as the cloud disappeared, Pharaoh's armies followed the Israelites into the path on the sea floor. God told Moses to stretch out his hand again, and the sea crashed in over Pharaoh and his armies, completely destroying them. The people of Israel were in awe of God's amazing power. They put trust in God and also in Moses. They sang songs, danced, and celebrated how God had saved them. Kind of long. What's the recap? What just happened?
I got the first part.
Okay, what's the first part?
I was memorizing over and over in my head. Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh and asked him to let the Israelites go.
Yep.
He said no, and then he just punished them harder. And then, I don't know if there's something that happened in there, but then God sent plagues to those people. And the first plague was turning the Nile into blood. So the water into blood. The second was frogs covering the land, which is repulsive. The third and fourth were lice everywhere.
Flies and lice, yeah.
Flies and lice. The fifth was disease on their livestock, right? Okay. The sixth was boils covering their body and sores. The seventh and eighth was, locusts and hail.
Yes.
Hail.
Nice.
And then the ninth was darkness.
Awesome.
And then the 10th was the Passover. But you guys can take over from there because I'm pretty proud of myself.
And after many of those plagues, Pharaoh resisted. So they did not break him.
Yep.
I can't remember how exactly it was worded on each of those, but he kept refusing to let God's people go, because that was the point of the plagues, is to convince him to let God's people go. And he kept resisting. And those plagues happened to the Egyptian people, but not to the Israelites. Especially, it said that in the plague of darkness, that there was still sunlight where the Israelites lived.
Yeah.
You want to take it from there, Tony?
Yep. And then is that when God instructed Moses about the preparation for the Passover?
Yep.
And the Israelites prepare for the Passover, and God does that, and then...
And that's where they must sacrifice a lamb. They kill a lamb.
Yep.
They take its blood.
Take its blood over the doorpost. And I think that it was at that point, was it when Pharaoh released them? Was it that?
Well, so then every
plague has to happen.
household
Yeah, the
that had
plague.
blood over the door
Yes.
frame,
Yep.
that's where the angel of death would pass over that
Yep.
home.
The plague occurs.
So every home that didn't have that, which was all the Egyptian homes, almost every home lost their firstborn son, including Pharaoh's home, who
Yep.
lost his
But
firstborn.
then I think that was when he let them go. But then after he had let them go, he had
heart
second
changed
thoughts or something,
again.
whatever it said. And so then he sent his people after them to chase after them.
And the
Yeah.
people left with wealth because
Yes.
the Egyptians gave them things to just
Right.
get them to leave
Right.
quicker.
And God guided them with this pillar of cloud, this smoke. I thought that was really cool. That
Yeah, it said it was between them and the Egyptians to cloud them.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah, I thought that was
A
really
literal
interesting.
smoke screen.
Yeah.
Then they got to the sea, and then God told Moses to like lift his arms, and then he spread the sea so that they could walk through on dry land.
Yep.
And after they
And
pass
then-
through, then Pharaoh and
Pharaoh shows
his
up.
army tries to come behind them, but they are destroyed.
Washed away.
Utterly destroyed.
Yeah, Pharaoh's heart has gone back and forth, back and forth, back and forth over 10 times at this point.
Just kidding.
Yeah, so did it mention, though, that God was hardening Pharaoh's heart?
Nope.
Oh, I wonder how I thought that. Okay, just
Not
wondering.
part of the story.
No, just wondering. Something's going on with that guy's heart if he's going back and forth
Right.
like this.
Yeah, it's weird.
Something's
He's
going
super
on.
stubborn.
Yeah.
And it ends with God's people dancing and celebrating.
Yep. Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
So, what does the story reveal about God?
He's powerful.
Yeah.
Obvious one. He's powerful.
He can call down plagues.
Yeah, that's pretty powerful.
He can alter weather. I mean, yeah, that's just
He has plans that Pharaoh cannot deter.
yeah. Man cannot.
Even if Pharaoh is stubborn, God
Yeah.
can still bring his plans to pass.
He also loves and cares about his people enough to continually cause these plagues over and over again until they finally were able to be free.
Well, not just that though, but like God is still moving in the midst of all these plagues. So I wonder at what point were the Israelites thinking like, all right, God, when are you just going to do it? But then there's plague after plague after plague, and he's still moving in the background with this big plan of getting them out.
I'm going to guess you probably have a question that I may be jumping to, but we have to ask the question, it's a natural question of why 10 plagues? Why not? This is what I always think. Why not just do the darkness plague where no Egyptians can see anything and go, okay, go. Nobody can see you. Leave.
Yeah, yeah.
Why did anyone have to die? Why was there so much destruction? And did he only love his people? And was he mad at the Egyptians or Pharaoh, or was there love in there? Because I just keep looking at the board because it's in my line of sight. So is he patient? Is he loving? Is he trustworthy? Does he want relationship with only his people or also with...
That's the thing
The
I was thinking
Egyptians.
about, was God trying to also reach the Egyptians by showing them his power that, hey, I could turn this river into blood. And could the Egyptians then begin to believe in God and say, no, we
Because I
believe?
think a lot of the plagues leading up to the Passover, like they were destructive, but they weren't, like he wasn't killing people. He was just, I think, showing his power. Like, yes, frogs covering the land is disgusting, but that's not like hurting people really. It's just like...
How could you just not believe in a God after seeing all that?
Well, so the first, I can't remember how many, 3 maybe, the Egyptian magicians could also do. But at some point they say, this is surely
There's the
God,
boils.
or this is...
Yeah.
We can't do this one.
Yeah,
Is
it
that
was-
like
it was
4 or
when they had the
5?
boils,
Like
I
4 or
think.
5 when they said that? 6?
Pretty much after the second one, they can't do
okay.
it. After the frogs. So the blood and the frogs they can do.
Okay.
And then...
Which,
only-
then
by
it's
the
the
way,
lice.
how are these magicians doing the same thing as God?
Right.
Like, that's just wild to me. Like, how can they even think of doing that?
Oh, it could have been localized as well. What is the message? So we covered that God is kind of like in control. He's showing his control and over all these natural forces, right? What is the message to the Egyptians of God kind of sparing the Israelites from all these things, right? So it's not like a full-on everybody gets hail, but it's like you guys get hail and you guys don't. What's that message to Pharaoh and the Egyptians?
I mean, if I were Pharaoh and the Egyptians, I'd be like, wow, if following God means that I don't have to suffer all of these things, I want to do that. So I'm pretty surprised that I don't know, I guess we don't know, but I'm surprised that none of the Egyptians were like curious about God after that.
Yeah, how did they not just denounce all the gods that they were worshiping and then say, this is the real God right here?
I think
however
that's a key point, I think.
Yeah.
Which, from what I know, from what I've studied historically even, and I think we talked about this maybe in the last episode even, there's so much pagan multiple god worship, so polytheism is what it's called, where you worship multiple gods. So it wouldn't be unusual for them to see acts of power, because they believed that if there's a lightning storm, the god of lightning just showed up, and if there was a fire, the god of fire just showed his wrath. If there was a terrible rainstorm and flooding, that was the god of rain. So it wouldn't be out of their understanding of there's a god of blood and there's a god of frogs. Yeah. But is it just a god is it just the god of frogs who can make frogs go everywhere except in this little circle? Like there's so much control and power there that is outside of what they've seen.
Yeah, I wonder if they can even grasp the idea of a monotheistic God. Just there can only be one God. If they really believe that there's a God for every natural occurrence at this point.
So this is maybe not fair, because I've studied some of the history of religion to this, and that is a real wrestling point. So kudos to you that you're even on that track without having done any study here, because there is power to multiple gods who can control multiple things. But if there's a God who couldn't control all of them, that's so far and above what they have ever seen in their context. There's no way, in fact, a lot of the historical supporting evidence says that wasn't just hail, it was fire inside of hail, which would mean the fire god and the hail god, who would never work together, are controlled by a greater god who is forcing those two elements to work together, that blows anything they've ever experienced in their polytheistic culture to pieces. That was maybe too much, sorry.
No,
that was slight cheating, because I've studied
I was
this
about
a
to
little
say,
bit.
Brilliant.
you're going off of the story
I think that's fine.
over there. But what I do feel like they know that the Egyptians knew that the Israelites were worshiping just one God, right? Okay, and if they were experiencing all of these 10 plagues and noticing that just the Israelites, nobody else, were not being affected by them, wouldn't that make you wonder, like, maybe it's because their God is protecting them and doing these things to us? I feel like that would make you...
Their God
I
is
was
greater
thinking
than
about
our
that,
God.
but I was also actually thinking about like Moses, like his faith during this thing. Like God speaks to him, and then he starts seeing all these crazy things happening. And then they show up to this ocean-type water thing, and it just splits in half, and they walk on dry ground doing something they've never done before. Like, I bet this guy's like, yes, I believe God is real. Like, if at that point you still don't believe God,
Do you wonder if he felt guilt? I never thought of that before right now. Do you
Why-
wonder if Moses felt guilt? Because he's the one that's declaring the plague that's coming. It's not his fault, but wouldn't you feel bad watching all those people suffer? You'd feel bad for them. I don't know. Just a thought.
yeah.
Well, this is the guy that killed an Egyptian because the Egyptian was beaten on the Israelite. So
Yes, but
seems like there's not a whole lot of
He's had
love
a lot
to
of
Egyptians.
years to grow on the inside since then. Hasn't it been like 40 years since
he
then?
escaped, went, had a
Okay.
family, came back. Yeah.
Think of like this is like Hulk Hogan versus Princess Di. Princess Di probably would have just like, not you, Princess Di. but-
There's a visual right there.
You are
Hulk Hogan and a
princess.
princess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So did we talk about what did actually? So God is powerful. Is there anything else you want to reveal out of this? He
About
can
God?
control. Yeah. Is there anything
God
else?
hears the cry of his people.
Yeah, yeah.
God
Yep.
answers prayer.
I think we have to ask the question again, is he mean? Is he just super mad at one group of people and very loving to the other? Or could there be a motive in there towards the Egyptians that is not one of anger?
Yeah. Can God have favorites?
Because I keep
Yeah.
looking at the word patience above Rachel's head. For some reason, that's in my line of sight. And I keep thinking, Is he maybe being patient? Is that why there's so many plagues? Because he's giving them chance after chance after chance after chance to not have to suffer another plague, but to bow their knee or surrender.
Well, that's what, I don't know, that's what I was thinking about all of these plagues leading up to Passover not being like life-threatening things. They're just things that hopefully would maybe make the Egyptians question their gods and see the Israelites worshiping their one God and maybe, I don't know, start being curious or something. Because if he would have just killed them all right away or like did the Passover right away, then he didn't even give them a chance to come to
But
him.
do you think from the perspective of an Egyptian, they'd say, why would I believe in this God after like my firstborn just died? Like, I feel like there's a lot of emotional conflict in this story where people are probably like really upset. I mean, I cannot imagine the scene in Egypt that day when that happened.
Oh, yeah.
But I also kind of imagine most saying like, hey, we told you guys, like, we told you this is going to happen.
Well, do you think that by the time the Passover came, God was just like, I don't know, not giving up on them, like turning to him, but was more interested in delivering or like bringing the Israelites out than the hope that those people would come to him? I don't know if that makes
I
sense,
feel like
but
after 10 chances, I mean, how many more plagues does God have to send at this point? You know,
Like, okay,
we're running out of things at this
you've
point.
made your choice.
Yeah.
like it's
Let's
pretty
break the
clear that
will.
Frogs,
you
blood, I
aren't
don't know
going
what
to
else
do
you guys
anything.
want.
You're not going to budge.
And really, did they make their choice or did Pharaoh make it for them? 'Cause
That's
I
another
really
thing.
feel like it's a whole nation of people that didn't have a lot of choice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was bow your knee to Pharaoh or be smited by him.
Yeah.
Yeah, so why didn't God just take Pharaoh out?
We skipped over the story, but remember in Joseph basically buys all the land in Egypt for Pharaoh. So Pharaoh owns everything. And so basically the whole land of Egypt is basically one big fiefdom of Pharaoh, which means everybody's a peasant or a slave level, except for the priests. They own their own land. But so they're all looking to Pharaoh, right? Pharaoh's the big boss. They tell him what to do. If Pharaoh says don't leave or don't let the Israelites go, then they're not going to let them go, right? And so
And I think you can contextualize it with like, I think of like countries now that are closed off, where all they know is like one supreme leader, and he's the God essentially to these people. And like they have to do what he says, whether they agree with it or not.
right.
Well, yeah, because if they were to like not follow him or try to join forces with the Israelites, whatever, I'm assuming that they probably would have been killed. That's just my thought, but I'm not sure. But I feel like they're kind of just like they have no choice but to continue to follow what Pharaoh does. So why didn't God just kill Pharaoh
Yeah.
and
right.
target him specifically instead of all of them? I don't know.
I have no idea.
Or maybe he was targeting him. I mean, maybe this is all about, will you, this high-powered guy, will you bow your knee? Because somewhere in there was even the magician saying, look, this is clearly God. Like, the God, not a God.
Yeah.
So even they are wavering, and Pharaoh's the one that holds the line. So it's unfortunate that an entire nation of people suffer because of his stubbornness. But
you'd hope that as a human being, you would see all of your people suffering with you and not want that anymore.
right. Yeah, yep.
But
It's a whole nother level of rebellion and stubbornness and pride and power. And
But I think that's what shows us about humanity is, I mean, we already have prideful, but this guy's stubborn as stubborn can be. He is not willing to budge, even after seeing these powerful moves of God.
and he's like, I don't know if indecisive is the right word, but he keeps going back on his own decisions. He's like, no.
it's almost like he starts to weaken and allow himself to surrender, and then, nope, I gotta steel myself again.
It doesn't say it directly, but we know that Pharaoh was considered an incarnation of the top god, Ra or Amun-Ra, something like that. And so as a guy in that position of power, which isn't just like, hey, I'm a king power, but it's like, hey, I'm the God power. And he knows like this whole nation of millions of people look to him as the God. That's really hard for your pride to let go of that, right? And just go, all right, I'm not the guy anymore. This is the one true God. And so it's easy for me to think or to see that Pharaoh would be stubborn because he doesn't want to give that up, right? He wants to hold on to that power and control. And yeah, and God wants the humility, and God wants the humbleness, and just the acknowledgement that God is more powerful than you are. God knows more, is control more, and it damages things. Yeah. So, all right, hard question. Why did God kill the Egyptian children?
I was really hoping you weren't going to ask a question like that.
This is a sticking point for a lot of atheists, for real. Like, why is God out there killing children? I know, I'm springing this on you.
Didn't we talk about this
And this is our last question, right? Like, we're probably almost at the end here, but
Yeah.
I haven't gotten the wave yet. Are we waving?
Yep.
Okay.
We talked about this, right? Was it week 2 or week 3 when the Israelites started taking over towns and territories and they said, don't leave anyone behind? We talked about this.
have we come to any new conclusions since then? Go, Rach.
No, I was just going to say, I don't know if this is what you were just saying, but yeah, didn't we talk about this with Noah and when and we talked about the innocent little children that were wiped out?
Yep.
So, and I feel like the conclusion that we came to, or one of with that, was that the children were likely going to be brought up the exact same way as their parents were, and they were going to continue doing the same destructive things. And so, maybe I feel like you could say the same thing for the Egyptians' children grammar.
If we add to that, children suffered in this, and firstborn children died. But in the story of Noah, everyone died. So whether or not they had a few seconds before they drowned to repent before the Creator God, we don't know. But in this case, the parents are going to live with the consequences of their choices, or Pharaoh's choice for them, depending on how you look at that. But
Yeah.
what will that do to the fact that they have however many years left to live to decide what they will do with their own heart?
And not saying that it's like good in any way that all these children were killed, but God easily could have just wiped out all of the Egyptians, like their entire families, everyone, and he didn't. So.
It seems like this is the only way to break the stubbornness of Pharaoh. Like, God knows everything. We know he's powerful and he's thoughtful and he knows everything. And so this is the only thing besides taking out Pharaoh himself to break Pharaoh. And he wants to give Pharaoh one last chance, saying, hey, look, despite all things, I will take your son and you're the next God in line, basically, and remove him. And so...
And unfortunately, our choices, if we have children, they do affect our children in some way or other.
Yep. All right, there's many more questions, many more issues of the 10 plagues, especially the last one. But that's it. Thanks for joining us. We appreciate it. Continue to ask those hard questions. Continue to wrestle with the story and what it's trying to teach about God and what God is trying to teach to the Israelites and to the Egyptians and to the other people around those through these stories. And even us, what is he trying to teach us about who God is? So thanks for joining us. We appreciate it.